Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Cleveland State University, Robert Conrad, and the Payne Fund.
Good morning, and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. Oh, okay. Oh, ring the bell. Hey. Shh. Dan, where are you when the sister needs you? Dan. Dan, this job is harder than I thought. Good morning, and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I am Nina Turner, former Ohio State Senator and proud City Club member. It is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, U.S. Senator from Vermont, Bernie Sanders. For a moment, cast your mind back to April of 2015. At that time, a Brooklyn, New York native turned independent U.S. Senator for Vermont announced his intention to run for the Democratic nomination for the president. A critic of Wall Street, he gained national recognition for his advocacy for the working poor, universal single-payer health care, expanding voting rights, and campaign finance reform. Senator Sanders was considered a long shot, and when he announced his intention to run, the prevailing mindset was that he would do little more than serve as a kind of provocateur and one who might inject into the campaign more ideas from the progressive movement. Boy, were folks wrong. A year later, Senator Sanders had won 18 primary contests and would go on to win 23 in all, securing more than 1,800 delegates. In the end, he inspired a generation, garnering more than 2 million votes from people under the age of 30, more than Hillary Clinton and Donald J. Trump combined. He completely upset conventional wisdom about presidential campaigns. Active in politics since his involvement in the civil rights movement while a student at the University of Chicago, Senator Sanders was first elected as mayor of Burlington in 1981. 10 years later, he served as a Vermont congressional representative. He joined the U.S. Senate in 2007 and is currently the longest-serving independent politician in Congress. And according to a recent Harvard-Harris poll, Senator Sanders is our country's most popular active politician. We need to give him a hand for that across all demographics. All demographics, including people of color. During the first 100 days of President Trump's first term, Senator Sanders continued to fight for his progressive agenda, including a new $15 minimum wage bill, outlining a free college tuition plan, and continuing to be a champion for single-payer health care system. As one who traveled this country with and on behalf of Senator Sanders as a national surrogate, I can tell you that he pierced the consciousness of this nation. He, in the words of President Teddy Roosevelt, is a doer of the deeds, proclaiming, as Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm once did, and I quote, "Our will can create a new America," end quote. And as I have said many times before, he is in the elected ministry, and he is one who has the heart and soul agreement that this country and this world needs. Ladies and gentlemen, members and friends of the City Club of Cleveland, it is my privilege and my honor to introduce to you this morning the magnificent Senator Bernie Sanders.
Thank you. Let me thank the Cleveland City Club for inviting me to be with you today. And let me congratulate you on all of the important work you have done for decades and decades. Your job is to involve people in the political process, to debate the important issues facing our country, to be a forum for freedom of speech, and that is what you've done, and it's an honor for me to be here. I also want to take this opportunity to thank Senator Nina Turner, not just for her kind words, and not just for the outstanding work she has done for the people of Ohio. As Nina indicated, we have traveled the country together, and I want you all to know that there are very few voices on the national stage from coast to coast who have spoken out for economic justice, for social justice, for racial justice, for environmental justice, with the force and the decency that Senator Nina Turner has. So, Nina, thank you so much for all that you've done. My only criticism of Nina is that when she gets going, you try to follow her before a whole lot of people. That's not easy. And I also want to thank my very dear friend, your Congresswoman from Ohio, Marcy Kaptur. Marcy and I have worked together. We have worked together for decades on many issues, including creating a trade policy in America that works for working people, not just the CEOs of large corporations. Marcy, thank you so much for what you do. Today we are assembled at an entity which prides itself on dissent, on freedom of speech. So let me say some things which may be a little bit provocative, some things that not everybody may agree with. But let me begin by saying, in a nation and a world which faces many, many crises, maybe the greatest crisis that we face is we don't effectively talk about the great crises that we face. And the truth is, we don't go forward. We're not going to solve the problems facing our country and the world unless we have the courage to bring those subjects out on the table. And I fear very much that for a variety of reasons, including corporate control over the media, some of the most important issues facing our country are not debated on television, on the radio, or certainly in the halls of Congress. So in the time that I have before I get to hear your questions, let me just touch on some of those issues that to me are of enormous consequence that as a nation we must address. And let me lay it right out on the table and tell you what I think very few members of the Congress will tell you. And that is, my greatest fear is that for a number of years now, this country has been moving rapidly in the direction of oligarchy, a nation in which a small number of billionaires and their corporate interests have increased control over our economy, our political system, and our media. And while this has been going on for decades, more and more control by fewer and fewer people, there is no question to my mind but that this drift has been accelerated rapidly under President Trump. And by the way, this movement toward oligarchy, toward the control of government, toward the control of our economy, is not just an American issue. It is an international issue. You don't hear much about this, but the fact is that globally, internationally, the top 1% now owns more wealth than the bottom 99% of the world's population. Even more incredible, the wealthiest 6 people, this is according to Oxfam, the wealthiest 6 people on this planet own more wealth than the bottom half of the world's population, 3.7 billion people. 6 people, more wealth than the bottom 3.7 billion. In other words, all over this world, today, right now, we have children dying of preventable illnesses. We have people drinking water that is filthy, living in substandard housing, kids not getting any education that they can use, and 6 people own more wealth than the bottom half of the world's population. We don't talk about that issue, but maybe it's time that we did. But it's not just globally, of course. Here in the United States, over the last 4 decades, there has been a massive shift in wealth from the middle class to the top 1/10 of 1%. Not 1%, 1/10 of 1%. 38 years ago, the top 1/10 of 1% owned about 7% of our nation's wealth. Today, that same 1/10 of 1% owns 22% of our wealth. In fact, the top 1/10 of 1% now owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. Now, I know we don't talk about it. I know it's not discussed in the United States Congress. But to my mind, when you have so few owning so much and so many people living in desperation, I think you've got not just an economic issue, you have a moral issue. And it's an issue that has to be put on the table. And while the wealthiest people become phenomenally wealthier, while the middle class shrinks, while 43 million people in this country live in poverty, some in desperate poverty, what we are seeing is the translation of that wealth going into politics. So this is just not only an economic issue of distribution of wealth and income and corporate control and Wall Street control over the economy, it becomes a political issue. Because the billionaire class does not put their money under their mattresses. They spend it. And people like the Koch brothers are spending hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in order to elect candidates who will represent the wealthy and the powerful. People who want more tax breaks for billionaires and cuts in Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. A fossil fuel industry who, like the tobacco industry of 50 years ago, lies and lies and lies. In this case, they are lying about the horrific damage that fossil fuel is doing to our climate in terms of climate change. That is what economic power is about. It is being translated into political power. And in my view, the struggle that we have right now, and I don't know that we're going to win this struggle, is whether we have a democracy of one person, one vote, or we're going to have an oligarchy in which billionaires buy elections. And if you think the 5-4 Citizens United Supreme Court decision was a bad decision, let's be clear that the Koch brothers and the Republican leadership in Congress think that Citizens United did not go far enough. Citizens United allows billionaires to spend as much as they want on independent expenditures, quote unquote. What the Koch brothers and the Republican leadership want is to do away with virtually all campaign finance regulations, have billionaires directly fund campaigns. So if you want to run for governor of Ohio or for the United States Senate from California, here is your check for $200 million. There's your campaign manager. There is your speechwriter. I own you. You are just another employee of mine. Now, that is where we are moving in this country. And I think on behalf of all of those millions of men and women in Ohio, in Vermont, and all over this country who stood up for democracy, we cannot allow this country to become an oligarchy. So what we have seen in recent decades is bad. Clearly, in my view, under President Trump, a bad situation is becoming worse in virtually every respect. Many of you recall, and I speak not just to those who are here, but to many of those who voted for Donald Trump. You recall not so long ago that Donald Trump ran a campaign which said, I, Donald Trump, hey, I am a different type of Republican. I'm not a Paul Ryan type Republican. Hey, I'm not going to cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. I'm going to stand up to the establishment. I'm going to stand up for the working class of this country. Well, unfortunately, he did not tell the truth. As a candidate, Trump talked about supporting health care for everybody. Health care for everybody. Well, what he ended up doing is supporting a proposal introduced by Speaker Paul Ryan, which throws 24 million people off of health insurance, cuts Medicaid by over $800 billion, defunds Planned Parenthood, and substantially raises premiums for people who are in their 60s, for older workers. In addition, in the so-called health care proposal, he cuts taxes for the top 2% by $300 billion, and a few $100 billion more in tax breaks go to the drug companies and the insurance companies. Now, this is from a man who ran for president saying he wanted health care for all, but that's not the end of it. President Trump has proposed a budget which would expand military spending by over $80 billion. This country today now spends more on the military than the next 12 countries combined. Trump wants $80 billion more on top of the $600 billion we currently spend. Yet, at the exact same time, he wants to cut funding for after-school programs when moms and dads all over this country who are working want to make sure that there is a safe place for their kids to be. He wants to cut funds for Pell Grants when kids are desperately trying to be able to afford to go to college. Wants to cut funding for the Head Start program, which has been a successful mechanism for lower-income kids to get the help they need to do well in school. Wants to cut funding for the WIC program, which is a program designed to protect and help low-income pregnant women and their little babies. All right, we got $80 billion more for the military, but we can't afford to take care of low-income pregnant women and their babies. And then, in addition to that, wants to make cuts on the Meals on Wheels program, which is a program that provides at least one hot meal a day for low-income senior citizens. Furthermore, the Republican leadership today in Congress is doing the bidding of the Koch brothers, following their agenda. They are working overtime to cut Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, federal aid to education, and environmental programs. Now, it seems to me that our job, Nina's job, my job, Marcy's job, the job of progressives, is not just to oppose Trump's reactionary agenda. We have got to do that. We have got to do it vigorously. And there are some of us in Congress who are working 7 days a week trying to do that. But in addition to that, what we need to do is bring forth a progressive agenda that addresses the needs of the working families of this country, an agenda which has a very different moral compass than that of President Trump. Nina mentioned that she was with me all over the country, what she saw and what I saw. And what the American people need to understand is that in this country today, there is an enormous amount of pain. You don't see it on CNN or CBS, but it is there. It is moms who get up this morning in Cleveland or Burlington, Vermont. They're making $30,000 or $40,000 a year, but they cannot find decent, affordable child care for their little ones because child care costs $10,000, $15,000 a year. It is young people, young students. I just met some beautiful young kids right here in Cleveland, kids who are bright, who desperately want to go to college, but they may not be able to make it to college because their families lack the resource. And other people, by the millions, are struggling with student debts of $50, $100, $200,000 a year. We don't talk about it much, but there are workers in Cleveland, Burlington, Vermont, who are 60, 62 years of age. They are approaching retirement. And yet half of the older workers in this country have nothing in the bank as they await retirement and turn on the TV and hear people talk about cutting Social Security. There are parts of this country today where life expectancy is going down, where people are living shorter lives than their parents. For the first time in the modern history of America, people living shorter lives out of desperation, out of no hope, out of no jobs, out of no income. There are people who are turning to opioids, they're turning to heroin, they're turning to alcohol, they are turning to suicide because they see nothing in front of them for themselves or their children. Now, we may not like that reality, but it is time we address that reality, and it is time that we determine how, as a nation, we go forward. And let me give you very briefly what I believe is an agenda that works for America, and by the way, is an agenda that by and large, not totally, is supported by the American people. And one of the points that we have to make is that Congress and the Republican leadership today, and Trump, are so far out of touch that when you take their agenda, forget the rhetoric, just put their agenda on the table, my guess is that 85% of the American people do not support it. Go out here, go out on a street corner in Cleveland, or in my state, or California, or in Mississippi, or in Kansas, or Nebraska, stand on a street corner and say to somebody, do you think it makes sense that we provide hundreds and hundreds of billion dollars in tax breaks for the top 1%, and that we then cut Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and federal aid to education? If 15% of the American people believe that makes sense, I would be surprised. That is precisely the agenda of the Republican leadership today, because they are more concerned about meeting the needs of the Koch brothers and the billionaire class than the needs of ordinary Americans. Now, when we talk about a progressive agenda, what does it mean? Not a radical idea. What about joining the rest of the industrialized world and guaranteeing health care to all people as a right? Through a Medicare for all single-payer program. Radical idea? Well, I live 50 miles away from the Canadian border. They have had that idea. They have implemented that idea for decades. They spend about 50% per capita compared to what we spend. They guarantee health care and provide health care to all of their people. At a time when 1 out of 5 Americans who go to a doctor's office can't afford to fill the prescriptions their doctors write, and at the same time as the 5 major drug companies made $50 billion in profit a couple of years ago, maybe it's time to tell the pharmaceutical industry they cannot continue to rip off the American people and charge us the highest prices in the world. That a radical idea? My guess that would be supported by about 90% of the American people. And one of the reasons that the middle class is in decline, and one of the reasons that our people are working 2 or 3 jobs, 50, 60, 70 hours a week, is that wages in this country are too low and have not kept pace with inflation. And that is why I have introduced legislation, or will soon introduce legislation. I'll have a whole lot of co-sponsors saying that in America, not a radical idea, if you work 40 hours a week, you should not be living in poverty. Let's raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. And when we talk about wages, how about ending the absurdity, the unfairness of women making 79 cents on the dollar compared to men? A radical idea, equal pay for equal work. And maybe, just maybe, now Donald Trump has a brilliant idea for tax reform. You've read, he's talking about tax reform. Here is his brilliant idea. He wants to repeal the estate tax. The estate tax applies to the top 0.2%. 99.8% of the Americans would not gain a nickel. And yet, repealing that estate tax would cost us $353 billion. Trump wants to cut Medicare, Medicaid, federal aid to education, Head Start, $353 billion in tax breaks for the top 0.2%. Well, I have a slightly different approach toward tax reform. And my approach is that maybe we start asking the largest, most profitable corporations and the wealthiest people in this country to start paying their fair share of taxes. When we talk about international embarrassment, turn off the TV when you hear these people talking about family values. We don't have family values when we have the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any industrialized nation on earth. You don't have family values when we are one of the very few countries in the world, not just industrialized countries, poor countries, that does not guarantee paid family and medical leave. Today in Cleveland, a woman is giving birth. She may be forced to go back to work in a week or two because she lacks the income to take care of her newborn baby. I think it's time to end that absurdity. Let's guarantee 12 weeks paid family and medical leave. All of you know we live in a highly competitive global economy. And in order for us to succeed now and in the future, we need the best educated workforce in the world. 20, 30 years ago, we had the best educated workforce in the world. We were number one in terms of the percentage of our people who graduated college. In case you don't know, today we are in 11th place. Now, how are you going to compete in the future when new jobs require new skills, when the best paying jobs require a higher education? And that is why I fervently believe that we need to make public colleges and universities in this country tuition free. And people say, well, Bernie, that's a nice idea. What are the free things you're giving away today? But I find that the same people who make that comment to me don't say to Donald Trump, do you really think that billionaires need more in tax breaks? So we're going to pay for free tuition at public colleges and universities by imposing a tax on Wall Street speculation. We need major criminal justice reform. This is the wealthiest country in the history of the world. We should not be having more people in jail, 2.2 million, disproportionately African American, Latino, Native American than any other country on earth. There are communities all over this country, in inner cities and in rural America, where youth unemployment is 20, 30, 40%. You don't hear much about it, but that is the truth. So maybe, just maybe, it might make more sense to invest in jobs for our young people, in education for our young people, rather than in jails and more incarceration. And furthermore, we have today, as you know, 11 million undocumented people. And I have had the opportunity, as I've traveled the country, to speak to many of them. Vast, vast, vast majority of them are hardworking, honest people. Many of them are trying to raise children. Many of them have been in this country for a long, long time. Today, they are living in the shadows. They are living in fear. They are exploited on the jobs because they don't have any legal rights to protect us, to protect them. Maybe instead of scapegoating those people, it might make more sense for us to move to comprehensive immigration reform and a path toward citizenship. Lastly, but certainly not least, is an issue where I must say, in many respects, Trump campaigned on one set of ideas and he is governing on a very different set of ideas. But I must confess, sadly, that there is an area where he has not changed his mind and he has been consistent. When he ran for president, Donald Trump told us that he believed climate change was a hoax. Well, I say to the president, climate change is not a hoax. I say to the president that if you listen to the overwhelming majority of scientists who study this issue, they will tell you that climate change is real, that it is caused by human activity, that it is already causing devastating problems in this country and around the world, and that if we do not act boldly by transforming our energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy, what we will be seeing in the years to come is more drought, more floods, more acidification of the ocean, more rising sea levels, more global conflict as people fight over limited natural resources. So I say to President Trump, pay attention to the scientists, not just the greed of the fossil fuel industry, which is prepared to sacrifice our future generations in order to earn short-term profits. So, I think I've probably raised one or two issues that will allow you to ask some questions. I want to thank you very much for your attention. I'd be happy to take the questions you have. Thank you very much.
Sure. Go ahead. Today we are enjoying a forum with Senator Bernie Sanders. We're about to begin the Q&A. We welcome questions from everyone, City Club members, guests, students, and those of you who are joining us by webcast. Please form a line behind the two microphones at the front of the room to ask your question. If you would like to tweet a question, please tweet at the City Club. And our staff will try to work your questions into the program. We want to remind you that your questions should be brief and to the point. Say it with me, brief and to the point. And that would allow us to get more questions in so that the senator can answer. May we now please have our first question.
My name is Aaron Godfrey. I'm a 30-year-old scientist. I'm running for Congress in a gerrymandered district for the GOP, of course. I was just wondering what advice you'd have for someone like me with almost no connections, no money, facing an uphill battle like you did, running for Congress in a bad district to help represent my generation and to continue the political revolution.
I think one of the things that we try to do during the presidential campaign and are working very hard right now is to do exactly what you're doing, is to involve people in the political process. My answer to your good question is to focus on grassroots approach, is to knock on as many doors as you can, to get as many volunteers to help you knocking on doors. At the end of the day, money is clearly very, very important. But people power, I believe, can beat money power. Talk about the real issues. Don't get involved in political gossip. Talk about the real issues that impact the people in your community. Get out there, knock on doors. I will tell you, maybe for some reassurance, that the first time I ran for public office, I ran on a third party in Vermont in the early 1970s. I got 2% of the vote. I ran again, I got 1% of the vote. So I'm sure you will do a lot better than I did. Okay, good luck.
Thank you.
Senator Sanders, my name is Steve Holeko. I am the political director of the Cuyahoga County Progressive Caucus. We are very proud to be the Northeast Ohio Our Revolution affiliate. Right now, we're working on an issue which embodies wealth inequality and corporate greed. And we're fighting this issue with your inspiration. Basically, it goes like this. If you drive east through the neighborhoods of Cleveland or west, you see blight. The city needs opioid treatment centers. The city needs mental health treatment centers. Yet, last Monday, Cleveland City Council passed an ordinance which is going to give $88 million in taxpayer money to Quicken Loans Arena to put a nice glass atrium. We are conducting a referendum on this. We're trying to get signatures to have the citizens of Cleveland vote on the issue. Your thoughts, please.
Well, first of all, thank you for your work with Our Revolution. What Our Revolution is trying to do is to get people involved in the political process and to give support to those candidates who are prepared to stand up to powerful special interests. And they have been having some pretty good results from coast to coast. Steve, I don't want to get too much involved in a very local issue, but I will tell you this. I think all over this country, and not just here in Cleveland, it took place in Las Vegas as well very recently. You have in many cases, literally billionaires, people who own professional teams who are going to taxpayers to ask for money. I don't like that idea. I think that smacks to me of corporate welfare. I think billionaires can fund their own endeavors. And when you talk about a city which has blight, a city which has educational problems, I think what government should be doing is investing in the needs of working people, of lower income people, and not just providing support to billionaires who can fund their own projects.
Good morning, Senator Sanders, and welcome to Cleveland. Thanks for being here this morning. So my question is about the implementation of that progressive agenda. From your experience, what is an advantage for achieving progressive change within a traditional party structure, and what is an advantage for achieving progressive change outside of a traditional party structure?
Well, that's a good question. I will tell you that when I ran for mayor of the city of Burlington, I ran as an independent, defeating a Democratic incumbent, as it were. And over the years, as mayor, we had to take on both the Democrats and the Republicans. And out of that came, without going into Vermont election law, we formed a non-party party, which we call the Progressive Coalition, which eventually resulted in the formation of perhaps the most progressive third party in the United States of America, the Vermont Progressive Party, which has, among other things, the lieutenant governor of the state of Vermont today. So it has had success. I think people are going to have to look at it. Right now, what I am trying to do, and I'm working really, really hard at it, is to get folks who are involved in the Democratic Party to recognize that the current strategy, the current approach of the Democratic Party has failed. Now, a lot of people don't want to hear that. And I understand it. I understand why people don't want to hear it. You invest a lot of time and energy into something you don't want to hear, but here is the truth. Here is the truth. We lost the White House to the least popular candidate in the history of this country. We have lost the U.S. Senate. We've lost the U.S. House. Today, Republicans control almost 2/3 of governor's chairs in America. And in the last 8.5 years or 9 years, Democrats have lost almost 1,000 legislative seats all over this country. That suggests to me that the current approach of the Democratic Party may not be working. So what I am trying to do now, and believe me, it ain't easy. And believe me, there'll be 14 articles and blogs attacking me today. But I am trying to revitalize and reform the Democratic Party to make it a grassroots party where the doors are open to working people and young people and people of color, people who may not have a lot of money, but who are interested in the future of their communities and their nations. And what particularly bothers me is not just that the Democratic Party is losing all over the country. They are losing to people whose agenda, as I mentioned a moment ago, is a horrific, unpopular agenda. All right, if we're losing to people who had better ideas than we did, I could deal with that. But how do you lose to a party that wants to give tax breaks to billionaires and cut Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid? So right now, with great pain and angst, I am trying to reform the Democratic Party. That's where my energy is. Yeah.
Good morning, Senator Sanders. My name is Chris Glassburn. I've done many things in my career, but my least favorite task is I am a gerrymanderer for Democrats. In 2000, people like me could draw districts down to, with some certainty, down to the city level, and could maybe on a statewide basis influence the distribution of seats by 10%. By 2020, it's going to be down to drawing around individuals' houses, and we'll be able to have an effect of almost 30%. Meaning that if you got 40% of the statewide vote, your party gets 70% of the seats. In Ohio, the League of Women Voters are trying a proposal next year, but do you have a position on redistricting reform?
Yeah.
And do you have a view as to whether there's a plausible national solution as opposed to a state-by-state fight on this issue?
Well, thank you very much, Chris, for that important question. I should say that in my state, which is one of the smallest in the country, we only have one member of Congress, so redistricting and gerrymandering, not exactly an issue that we worry about. In fact, there was only one United States congressman when I was congressman today, and now there are 2 United States senators, so I've kind of gone down a little bit. But here's what you got. When I think about the challenges to democracy today, I think about 3 major things. Number one, I talked about the huge amount of money that is going into politics to elect people. Number 2, and I didn't touch upon this, the incredible voter suppression that Republican governors and legislatures all over this country are implementing under the guise of fighting voter fraud. In fact, what they are doing is working overtime to try to make it harder for poor people, people of color, older people, young people to vote. And the third issue is the issue that you've raised. And that is gerrymandering, by definition. It was named after a guy named Jerry, right?
Yes.
Way back when in the 18th century, I think, wasn't it?
Yes.
Okay, so it's not a new idea, but I have to say that the Republicans have taken it, I think, to a whole new level. And, you know, if you look at some of these districts all over this country, it's like some modern artist type drawing some crazy configuration. I think the answer probably is for people to come together and say, look, the party in power cannot simply draw up the boundaries that they want. We're going to need an independent entity to sit down and draw them up in a way that is fair. I can't go anything. Now, that's not going to be easy because the party in power now can control the districts and make it work for them politically. But I think essentially it is an important enough issue to take it out of partisan politics and into a group of people who are looking at fair districts.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, Senator. I'm Rick. I'm from California visiting today. And last year you were out in California quite a bit campaigning on a Proposition 61,
Yep.
that would have lowered drug prices for California. And I believe in Ohio in November, that initiative will be on the November ballot, and voters here will have that opportunity. Are you going to engage, or are you going to encourage people on that initiative?
I haven't seen the initiative yet, but if it is somewhat similar to what existed in California, you're damn right I will. Look, we could go on for hours just talking about the healthcare crisis in America. The fact that we spend at least twice as much as any other country per capita, that despite the gains of the Affordable Care Act, 28 million Americans still have no health insurance. But in terms of prescription drugs, man, this pharmaceutical industry gets away with murder every single day. They're ripping us off unconscionably. California, I'll give you an example. When I was out in California, just to give you an example of how much money the pharmaceutical industry has. Essentially, what they tried to do in California was to say that the state should not pay more for prescription drugs than the Veterans Administration is paying. VA negotiates prices with the drug companies. That's what they said. I suppose that's what will be on the ballot here in Ohio. Who wants to guess? Well, I won't ask you. Do you know how much money the pharmaceutical industry spent in California to defeat that initiative? They spent over $120 million. They had $120 million available to defeat that initiative. I think the opponents of it, who were heavily outspent, who had almost no support. By the way, when you talk about the Democratic Party, it ended up that the supporters of that referendum, heavily outspent, got, I believe, 46% of the vote. They had almost no Democratic leadership even supporting them. They had to do it at the grassroots level. So yeah, I think in any and every way that we can, for the millions of senior citizens in this country today who cut their pills in half or cannot afford the medicine they need, for the 1 out of 5 people who walk away from the doctor's office when they're sick and can't afford to buy medicine, yeah, I think in every way that we can, we're going to have to take on one of the most powerful, next to Wall Street, pharmaceutical industry is the most powerful entity in America. They almost never lose. They have enormous power over the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, and it is time in every way that we took them on.
Hello, Senator Sanders. Please excuse my nervousness. So my question is, I'm a senior in high school and I'm afraid for the future of my country. I would like to know how, as a concerned youth, how can I let my voice be known that I do not want my government transitioning to an oligarchy, denying climate change, and cutting taxes for the 1%?
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you for being here, and you've taken a big step forward. And one of the, I think, very positive things that I am seeing all over this country is more and more young people running for office, getting involved in the political process. The first thing, I'm sorry, your first name is?
Zach.
Zach?
Yep.
Zach, what you got to know, let me tell you a secret. You're not going to see it on TV. You are a very powerful guy. You are a powerful person if you believe that you are powerful. If you understand that democracy is not a basketball game. I understand that you take basketball seriously here in Cleveland. I got it. I understand there's a big game down the street here. I got it. Everybody's going to be watching the game except the 12 or 15 guys who are playing tonight. Democracy is not the LeBron James show. Democracy is you and you and you. And what we have to understand is that when you stand up, when you get your fellow students involved, you know, tomorrow you can have a petition with 200 of your fellow students inviting your member of Congress to come and talk to you and to say, don't bother coming back on election day if you're not prepared to come and talk to us today, to your governor, to your members of the legislature. You can, with your fellow students, make demands about divestiture in terms of fossil fuel industry. Do whatever you want to do. Racial justice, women's rights, whatever the issue is that you think is important. When you stand together and you say to the elected officials, hey, you know what? We actually know what's going on, and we are watching you, and if you don't do your job, we're going to get rid of you because she is thinking of running for your position. So you better come and talk to us, and you better tell us why you're voting for tax breaks for billionaires and cutting Social Security or Medicare, or making it harder for young people to go to college. Bottom line is, if you take the view there is nothing that you can accomplish, if you throw your hands up in your despair, if you think you're powerless, you are powerless. If you think you are, give you one example. If we were here 5 or 6 years ago, and somebody raised their hand and they said, Bernie, You know, this federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour is a starvation wage. We've got to raise it to $15 an hour. Everybody in the room would say, $15 an hour, you're out of your mind? You're thinking about more than doubling the minimum wage. It can't happen. But you know what happened? Very brave people in the fast food industry, people who are making $8, $9, $10 an hour, they went out on strike. They demonstrated. They told the American people that nobody can make it on $10 an hour, that the minimum wage has got to be raised to $15 an hour, and people have the right to form unions. And you know what happened? Out in Seattle and in San Francisco, city councils started to pass that, and New York State, et cetera, because people stood up and fought back. Now, what people want to tell you, and you go through the history of this country, whether it's workers' rights or whether it's civil rights or whether it's women's rights or environment, when people begin to stand up, other people say, oh, you can't accomplish it. Too hard. You're too big of a dreamer. Well, don't you believe that. Stand up and fight for justice. Bring your friends in and you'll win.
Thank you.
Senator Sanders, thank you so much for being here today. My name is Nina Rossi. I'm a 30-year-old activist here in Cleveland. Lately, there's been some criticism over you and the Democratic Party endorsing an anti-choice candidate in Nebraska. What are your plans to bridge the gap between the party and its women voters who are feeling ostracized over this?
Well, thank you for asking that question. Okay, so let's look at what happened. In Nebraska, we have a governor who's a conservative Republican. You have every member from Nebraska in the state legislature who are conservative Republicans. You have a state legislature which is overwhelmingly conservative Republican. And you got the mayor of Omaha, Nebraska, who is a conservative Republican. In fact, Scott Walker, one of your neighbors, was there to campaign for her a week or two ago. Now, I was the Democrats in that area nominated a young man named Heath Mello to become mayor. And I was invited to come out to a rally along with Keith Ellison that brought out 6,000 people in Omaha, Nebraska. And I ran for mayor a whole lot. I never had 1,000 people coming out to a rally. Tremendous enthusiasm. Now, it turns out that over the years, Heath had voted against my views. I am 100% pro-choice and will do everything that I can to defend a woman's right to choose and to defend Planned Parenthood. But right now, I and Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi can't do much because the United States Congress and the White House are controlled by Republicans. So I think if we are going, there is no debate, but that the Democratic Party is and must be a pro-choice party. But there should also be no debate that we are going to lose the struggle for women's rights and the right of women to control their own bodies unless we get rid of Republican control in the United States Congress. Now, if, and I don't know if he will, I think it's going to be a tight race there in Omaha, but if Heath can win in Omaha, it will be a breakthrough in one of the most conservative states in this country. And maybe in a few years, we're going to have some members of Congress from Nebraska helping us in the Congress. And maybe we could do that in Kansas, where a fellow there ran a very strong race. He lost by 7 points. And maybe we could do it in Montana, where I will be going in a couple of weeks. So what I am telling you is I think, of course, the Democratic Party is and always will be, if I have anything to say about it, a pro-choice party. But there are parts of this country where there are people who have different points of view, okay? And if they can win races and add to our numbers in Washington, I think that that is a good idea. And by the way, this particular candidate pledged, you know, this is the mayor of Omaha. He's not running for the Supreme Court. And their major issue in Omaha is rebuilding their infrastructure not abortion, which our mayor doesn't have much to do with. Yeah. Whoops. Uh-oh. All right.
We don't have time.
Okay.
We
My
don't have.
question is so quick. Draft BernieForAPeoplesParty.org. Many of us are so fed up with the Democratic Party and have lost complete faith. And we would like you to step aside and step up, and we are behind you 1,000% to follow you. And I have petitions at table 25, and we hope that you will step up. And what would you say?
Everybody wants to draft the senator. Let's give the senator another round of applause. Today at the City Club. Yeah. You guys can do that if you want to. I see that. Today at the City Club, we have been enjoying a forum with Senator Bernie Sanders. Today's forum is the Stephen A. Minter Endowed Forum, made possible by the generous contributions from the 5 member banks of the Cleveland Foundation in honor of Mr. Minter's retirement from the City Club, from the Cleveland Foundation. We are honored to have Mr. Minter with us today, and we thank you for your generosity, Mr. Minters, and your continued support of the City Club. We also like to thank our hosts, the Global Center of Health. We appreciate your partnership. We welcome guests at tables hosted by the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, the City Club of the Mahoning Valley, Cleveland Clinic, Councilman Tony Brackatelli, Cuyahoga County Community College, where futures begin, Cuyahoga County Democratic Party, Cuyahoga County Progressive Caucus, Friends of Dr. Pat Bakova, the Greater Cleveland Schools Superintendents Association, Key Bank, the R Strategy Group, the Center for Community Solutions, the Legal Aid Society. Center, we got a lot of sponsors here tonight. And Umar and Byrne. Lastly, we welcome students from Facing History New Tech and the MC Squared STEM High School to today's forum. Student participation in the City Club Forum is provided by many foundations, including the William E. West Foundation. We are thankful today to have so many young people in the house. And that brings us to the end of today's forum. Thank you, Senator Sanders. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And Senator, you got to hit the gong. Hit the gong. Hit the gong, Senator. We are adjourned.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.
Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Cleveland State University, Robert Conrad, and the Payne Fund.